Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Pharmacist Diaries podcast. So excited to have you here, and on today's episode we are fortunate to talk to Aditya Aggarwal. A little bit of background on Aditya is that he is the current Senior Service Manager at Hillingdon NHS Trust. But today's episode is really exciting because we are going to be talking all about artificial intelligence in pharmacy. So if that is something of interest to you, then this is definitely an episode that you should continue watching. In terms of his background, he has so much experience similar to mine. He's worked in community, he's worked in the government, he's been a NHS clinical entrepreneur, which is a part of an NHS England initiative. He is obviously now working as a leader in operations in a hospital. So I'm excited to get into this episode, and let's dive into it. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to the podcast, Anisha.
I'm so excited because we've not talked about this topic. So we've got a lot to learn, and I'm excited obviously to explore your journey and why you got into this area of expertise. And I actually don't know that much about it, so I'm very curious to learn. But before we kind of dive into that, tell me a little bit about your journey into pharmacy and why you became a pharmacist in the first place.
Sure, thank you. So I'm a second generation pharmacist in my family. And if you take it broader, I'm actually third generation in healthcare. So healthcare kind of runs in our family. And I think, the running joke is we have enough doctors in the family that we could almost start a hospital. So I chose going down pharmacy route, and I was really unsure to begin with. But then during a year before I applied for pharmacy school, I met a pharmacist who was doing something very different with their career. Her and her husband both had done PhDs, and he was working as an investment researcher, running his own boutique, and she was still a pharmacist. And it's through those conversations I understood actually you can do your degree become a pharmacist, qualify, and do anything else because the degree is still a degree. And so I realized that's what I wanted to perhaps go down and do. And so I started my degree at University of East Anglia, and that was really cool 4 years. And I really took the opportunity to try and learn as much as I could about pharmacy, but also what opportunities there are with pharmacy and networking as much as possible. And as a result, this led me down a whole different rabbit hole. And I realized actually there isn't something that teaches people of different career options with pharmacy. I'm doing all this work. This is my third year of university, and I'm like, people are asking me, well, what can we do? And I'm like, I'm a third year. What do I know? But then I realized I had built this network of individuals who I've been speaking to, which included one of your former podcasters, Ravi. And as a result, I set up a conference at the University of East Anglia, which took place in January 2016, talking about careers with your pharmacy degree and the mission. And that was what, and might have cut that, but and as a result of that, I realized there's so much we can do, and I've been trying to support people in that education in a way. And then that led me to my own journey, which that was my first foray into the world of entrepreneurship, into creating something and delivering on it. And actually, we delivered a small profit, which I gave to university for them to do what they want with that. And then afterwards, when I was doing my pre-reg, so going back into full-time community pharmacy, I realized there was a specific incident, and I remember there was a gentleman who came in. He was just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. He looked really upset. He had bought a prescription, and the first thing when he handed a prescription to me was, I've just been diagnosed with this. I feel really upset about this. I said, no worries, grab a seat and I'll come talk you through your medicines afterwards. And I spoke to the pharmacist, make sure I get my counselling tips on point. And then when I had a conversation with him, what could have been a 10-minute conversation actually ended up being a 45-minute conversation with the gentleman because he was really upset. And I talked him through his medicines, talked him through the diet, talked him through all the changes he could consider, and really delved into, his lifestyle so we can make that change to really encourage him. At the end of that, I got told by the pharmacist, you spent too long with that patient. We don't have that time. You've got all these prescriptions that need dispensing. And I felt, that's great. The prescriptions are an important part of pharmacy, but patient interaction is really important. And so I saw at that point that there needs to be a change to the way pharmacists operate in community in order to spending more time with patients and to really get the best value of the skills of a pharmacist. Because we're taught in pharmacy clinical skills, we're taught how to speak to people, we're also taught our being experts in medicines. But I felt that wasn't being used in the best way. And so I decided to go and explore the wider space of healthcare and to see what else is going on across the space, because I had an interest in the policy space as well. And so I applied to the NHS graduate scheme, and then which was a 2-year scheme by the NHS Leadership Academy, and I did the policy and strategy stream. And from that, I worked across 4 different places. So I qualified and then went straight into that. And then on the side, I continued to locum as a community pharmacist. And then I worked in integrated care, worked in a mental health trust, worked in government, in the Prime Minister's implementation unit, in the Cabinet Office, and then came back to NHS England to do some clinical policy and strategy. And that's been my career, early career, if you like.
Well, that's quite cool, actually. And that is quite interesting how you've had an interaction with obviously your employer or the pharmacist that you're working with that was slightly negative, but shifted your perspective on what you wanted from your career and how you felt that interaction with the patient was so valuable and so important, yet you're being encouraged to step away from that, which I'm sure a lot of pharmacists are dealing with on a day-to-day basis in community pharmacy. I've actually stepped back into community pharmacy as of last week. A lot of people will have seen that through social media. I'm in such a flexible position at the moment doing kind of locum jobs, and one of the local community pharmacies where I live was looking for some support. And so I'm just doing 2 days a week. And actually, it's been a real eye-opening experience. I'm the second pharmacist there. The owner is actually the main pharmacist, but at the moment he's a new business owner. So he's focusing a lot on the business side of the pharmacy, changing contracts and accounts and all sorts of things. So he's sort of steps away from the pharmacy and is in the back office working, and I'm kind of managing the dispensary with the team. But I've been really fortunate to have multiple members of staff. They've got 2 people on the counter, 3 or 4 technicians, plus the trainee pharmacist. And they know what they're doing in terms of cracking on with the job. So a lot of the time I am checking like a machine. And I haven't had to stand for 9-10 hours of my day for a very long time. So it has been quite tiring. And the counter staff know that I've got lots of experience in pediatrics. So every single child that comes in the door comes my way, which is a joy for me and allows me to utilize my other skills and experience in a community setting. A lot of things are, the common kind of rashes, ear infections, viruses that are going around. But it's been nice to see what parents come into a community pharmacy for support with, like compared to working in a tertiary hospital. And I've made a real effort to spend more time with the customers, and I've been really clear with the pharmacy owner that, look, this is where I thrive. I will do all the jobs that you need me to do, but you have to allow me to spend time with the customers and get to know the clientele and be able to be a patient-facing pharmacist. Otherwise, this relationship just isn't going to work out for either of us, because if I can't enjoy the job and feel like I'm making an impact, I won't really want to stay. So every walk-in customer, I've made an effort to hand out the prescription myself and make sure that I fully counsel them on medications. And lots of things I've had to look up. The amount of HRT that's coming through, which I don't know that much about because I've been in peds for the last few years, has been interesting. Loads of antibiotic prescriptions are coming through, and it's June, and it just seems crazy that there are so many people with infections, chest infections. But I still feel like I'm doing a really good job as a retail pharmacist, and I think voicing your opinion as a locum and having the confidence to actually say to your new employer that, hey, this is how I want to run things. You let me know what the basics are that you need me to do, but this is also something that I'm really passionate about and I want to be part of that journey for the patient, was a good way to kind of step into the role. But as a newly qualified pharmacist, it's hard to do that. You sometimes don't even know what you like at that point. And when you're employed by a company, you kind of do what they need you to do, right? And you follow the rules and the schedules and the policies, and you kind of conform to the needs. So I can understand from your perspective a few years ago that it was quite challenging to be faced with that, being told that, hey, your job is to be behind the counter and in the dispensary, being that checking machine, which is why a lot of pharmacists who work in community say that they never feel like they're clinical pharmacists. And I'm going to be posting about it through social media because I'm going to challenge that because of what I've experienced in the last few shifts. I feel like it's such an amazing opportunity to be clinical, and it's just shifting your mindset in terms of what that means as a pharmacist. Because I have made some amazing interventions, incredible counselling experiences. Patients have come back the week later and just hugged me and thanked me, and I've only been there 2 weeks. So I know that there's opportunity to make an impact, and I want to challenge retail a little bit. Tell me a little bit about this graduate scheme. I haven't heard of it, and how did you find it?
Sure. I don't remember exactly how I came across it. I think I might have been looking for graduate schemes at the time, thinking, is there an NHS one? Might have seen it in the papers or something. But I realised that it did give me a lot of what I wanted, in a sense of, because I chose the policy and strategy stream, which is, there are different streams. So there's general management, there's health informatics, there's health analysis, and there's policy and strategy. There might be more now than even then when I did mine. But I chose policy and strategy because that's the space I enjoy most. But also it came with funding for a diploma in health policy at the time. So I did a funded diploma in health policy from Imperial. And then after I'd done that, I topped it up to make it a master's. And that for me was something I really wanted to understand. And also what better than from a top quality institution like Imperial. And so I think, what I learned was there's so many different ways of making a change in the healthcare system in order to impact the patient. And it's like, and what I realized, it's like medicines. If you have a pathway for a cardiovascular disease, you have to get the pathway right for the patient to have the best treatment possible. Same thing in healthcare, where if you want to make a change at the front line that impacts positively on a patient, you've got all of the other bits that need to be changed alongside that, whether that be the financial levers, whether that be the policy levers, the politics, the strategy, the direction. All of those need to be aligned in order to make a change, or in order for something to come to fruition to make an impact on patients. And I suppose I went in as a slightly angry pharmacist thinking, why is the community pharmacy contract structured in as it is? And then coming out with an understanding of, okay, yes, I'm still not happy with the way the contract was structured, but I understand these are the challenges and this is how difficult it actually is to make the change that's needed.
Interesting. And did you like kind of policy and leadership as a student? Did you know that this was something that you enjoyed when you were doing your MPharm?
Definitely. So
Okay.
The pharmacy practice side was something I really enjoyed. So the clinical was, without disparaging it, clinical was something I did, not something I enjoyed. Whereas the pharmacy practice and the law, I really used to enjoy reading that and trying to understand more about, why did certain cases go certain ways. And I think, if I was to go back and I didn't get on the graduate scheme, my next probable choice was probably to go down the pharmacy law route, because I think I enjoyed that kind of work. But things worked out and I ended up on the graduate scheme. So that's the career path in a way I've taken.
Cool. I like that. And it's good that you actually identified that early in your career. And obviously it takes you back to the fact that you did dive into what opportunities were available to you as a student, and you identified that there wasn't that much information out there, and you created something from scratch to help even your friends and kind of peers within your cohort about the different opportunities that were available to you once qualifying. It's a bit like this podcast, isn't it? Teaching MPharm students early kind of first years and second years, it still feels like there is a lack of information out there on opportunities that are available to pharmacists. And this is the reason why this podcast was born. Me understanding the student's perspective helped me to create this vision, because we're still in that mindset of the yearly careers fairs. And I truly believe that the traditional way that they're hosted, in terms of lots of, companies come to a careers fair and you walk around and you have an opportunity to meet people. I feel like students don't necessarily know what to say, what to ask, how to be curious when it comes to job opportunities. A lot of the time, students will ask questions around how can I get a placement for the summer, but they don't necessarily know what types of questions to ask with regards to the actual day in the life in terms of the job. What career opportunities can I get 3 years into the role or 5 years into the role? Or how can I expand my skills and my experiences? If you look at 150 students in a cohort, it's a limited number of students who know how to ask those questions or feel confident enough to ask those questions. I feel like a lot of students go to those events for a lot of the freebies and the free food. And, they spend time with their friends. But I just don't think that traditional format is the best way of helping students to identify what opportunities there are. And they're still very traditional. There is always a big retailer there. If they find an industry expert or an industry organization to come, they'll be there. There's now GP practices who tend to come, and there'll always be hospitals within that area. I mean, those are 4 very standard streams that you can go down, but there are so many other options within pharmacy that aren't discussed during the program or at the careers fair. So obviously I'm trying to close that gap by providing that information through audio and video, and it seems to be doing the job. And I have so much further to go in terms of my reach, but I'm really pleased that I'm hearing back from pharmacy students saying that actually this is a game changer. Listening to this behind the scenes content from people who are actually living lives as pharmacists and hearing the good, the bad, the ugly, the challenges, the achievements, it's giving us insight into, can we do this? Can I see myself in that field? Can I visualize what that pathway could look like for me? Or giving them ideas about opportunities that they didn't know about, or potentially listening to an episode, and if they're interested in AI, they could reach out to you on LinkedIn. It's an opportunity for them to say, hey, I listened to this episode of the Pharmacist Diaries podcast. I've connected with you on LinkedIn, and I'd like to know about more about opportunities, because social media is the new way of networking. It is the way forward at the end of the day. So, I'm really pleased that, the podcast provides that for people. But what I wanted to ask, going back to the pharmacy contract, so I don't know that much about the community pharmacy contracts. And when you say that you were kind of frustrated with how they're kind of developed and what maybe services are expected, what were the challenges that you thought about, or what were the things that frustrated you that really drove you to look at applying for a graduate scheme, which is in policy development?
Sure. So first of all, just to say, I think your podcast is genuinely fantastic. And, I agree that there needs to be a lot of the education that goes out there to support students. If I look into other professions like medicine, there's so much out there to support doctors and doctors in training about what to do with their career. So I think what you're doing is genuinely fantastic.
Oh, thanks.
But regarding community pharmacy contract, I read the contract during my pre-reg. I mean, who does that? And I wanted to understand, what does it mean? Obviously, there's a lot I didn't understand, but there's bits I do understand. And I realized how much was focused on the dispensing side of pharmacy and not as much, say, on services. But then when you read the changes that were perhaps being tutored at, from various events. I mean, I was a pre-reg and I went and attended the Chief Pharmaceutical Officers Conference. I mean, again, what pre-reg does that? I did that because I wanted to understand what is the direction of the future of community pharmacy. And it was very clear at the time that they were saying, we want community pharmacy to become more clinical. We want them to become more patient-facing. But then you also hear from the other side, there's no additional money. So, okay, if that's the environment people are working within, that means they're going to have to cut some dispensing in order to make money available for services. And then I'm thinking back, well, if I was, as a pre-reg, what does that mean for me and the pharmacy I work in? Well, that means doing more for less. What could be tutored as more efficiency, being more efficient by certain organizational standards. And I realized that's going to make things very difficult. And, am I happy with that? Probably not. I think we're already working quite hard. We're working with minimal staff, with, one counter assistant and one technician, me and the pharmacist. That's it. And so it made things and if you're asked to deliver more with that same resource, it makes things very difficult. And I realized I don't understand this money point. I don't understand why would someone want to do that from a policy perspective? And so that's kind of what launched me into going down the whole graduate scheme and understand, how does healthcare operate in this country? What is the landscape of healthcare? What's working in other spaces that perhaps could be brought into the community pharmacy space? Because I didn't realize until I did the graduate scheme that community pharmacy, is such a pivotal part, the most accessible part of the primary care world and the NHS. Yet, when people talk about primary care, they don't talk about community pharmacy, they talk about general practice. And I realized there's a huge disconnect in what community pharmacy is seen to be versus what their impact actually can be by the system. And that understanding that and coming to terms with that as well is a point that I've really understood.
Interesting. And what were the main things that you surprised you during the NHS graduate scheme that you didn't know already?
So policy is one of those things that people talk about, but I don't really know, what that involves. And I think going and doing that was really interesting. Whether that be I worked in specialized commissioning, so that's really specialist medicines. I worked in that, and that was really interesting. But I think my most telling placement was in the Cabinet Office in the Prime Minister's Implementation Unit, where I'd gone in for about 6 weeks. I'm going in as a pharmacist who's worked frontline in the NHS, done some policy work in NHS England, and then I secured my own placement to go here for 6 weeks. And people are saying, oh, well, no, this person really understands healthcare. Not me, there was another person. And then I asked them their background, and they had done 6 months at NHS England. And I was like, this is the individual saying who understands healthcare, as opposed to someone who's actually worked frontline. Not say, for example, myself, but they have access to other people who be able to do that. But it's that whole, it appears that the use of lived experiences isn't actually that great within the policymaking space in certain spaces. And I think that was a really big eye-opener for me. And again, coming to terms with that thing, how can that be okay? Because if we've got a patient in front of us and we don't have the right skill set to deal with, to, support them, we bring someone else in who can, or we refer them to somewhere who can. But the policy-making process doesn't seem to have that. It's just, oh, well, I'll do the best we'll get some expert advice, but I'm going to make my own decision here. And it's very disconnected from what happens on the ground. And, I think that might be because of the layers and the politics that comes involved, which, there's a certain agenda that needs to be pushed.
That's interesting. And do you feel like the M-Pharm and doing your degree prepared you for the skills that you needed for a graduate scheme? Because it seems like you're probably learning with experience and on the go and developing your skills within the scheme itself. But what sort of skills do you actually need within that scheme to be successful?
I would say one of the big skills that we learn in our M-Pharm, especially through your final year project, is that curiosity, that drive to find an answer no matter what. I think I did that through my undergraduate dissertation, and I remember getting told with my thesis was, okay, yeah, I think you need to stop on this point and focus on this point. And because I had a relentless drive to try and want to solve a particular problem. So that's definitely one thing. Second thing is leadership. I think universities are a lot better than they used to be on developing leadership within future pharmacy leaders, and I think so. People need to really embrace that and take those leadership opportunities in their universities, whether that be through your pharmacy society or whether that be through just taking on small projects within the courses that you do. And the third thing is just try and think broader than pharmacy when you're trying to solve a problem. Pharmacy, I think they are incredibly broad individuals, and they offer so much as pharmacists. But I feel that if you pigeonhole in thinking as a pharmacist, then every problem you'll come across, you'll be thinking as a pharmacist and not with your full toolkit of, understanding what does a policy mean, understanding what leadership means, understanding what, from the law side as well. So I think, try and read into as much as you can outside of pharmacy, because then when you are a pharmacist, you'll have a lot more skills to rely on than just being as a pharmacist.
Interesting. I like that. It's definitely a good idea to step into leadership as a student. But I would say again that there are limited numbers of students who probably A, know that, and B, find opportunities. But one good place that I always recommend students to, in terms of societies, to join is BPSA. I went to UEA, your uni, for their careers fair, which was actually awesome, and did a small presentation about my career journey and Pharmacist Diaries, and was raising awareness of the podcast. And they were the most engaged students that I have ever come across. I got a standing ovation at the end of my talk, which was very cool, because the students were super excited. They were like, wow, look at this lady's fun career history. She's made pharmacy out to be very fun as well. And now she's got this really cool podcast and is on social media. So obviously they're inspired by that. But they were really excited to see the non-traditional pathways as well. And I discovered that a lot of the students who were at the careers fair are also members of BPSA. I then did talks for BPSA virtually in terms of my career journey, and I have made connections with the most incredible students who are engaged in loads of things, whether it be, supporting on the executive committee, which they have to really apply for. They have, elections, and it's all announced in their kind of yearly conference. They have so many events going on across the country, and you have so much opportunity to learn in terms of being a leader and taking responsibility for things outside of your kind of 9 to 5 of university. For me, I worked in a community pharmacy on weekends. I was a student. We were expected to be at university 9 till 6, Monday to Friday. So by the time we got home, and I lived with my parents at the time, when I did my pharmacy degree, I just relaxed and kind of did whatever kind of homework and stuff that we had to do and kind of studying. But weekends I was always working, and any time off that I have, I always use for travel. It's who I am, and it's part and parcel of my personality. But all the pocket money I kind of gathered from working in a community pharmacy was spent on adventure. But I did do pockets of kind of leadership. I started our pharmacy society when I was a student, and that was really nice to kind of understand how to manage a community or a group of people, to gather them and engage them in different activities. The networking piece came into that, and the networking piece comes into this podcast, right? You're constantly engaging with people to come onto the podcast or share things on social media, whatever it is. I love connecting with people, and I've discovered that when it comes to joy, and if you genuinely are passionate about things, that you'll just do it over and over and over again. And now I'm just trying to lean into that, which is quite nice. It's an enjoyable part of kind of your job, to know that you're utilizing skills that genuinely suit who you are. So yeah, I'm enjoying that part of the journey at the moment. I was going to ask you if the graduate scheme is a paid opportunity, or is it?
Yeah, so it's like any other graduate scheme. So it's a full 2-year funded program. So I suppose they're different depending on which career, where you are in your career. Me doing it from pre-reg straight in worked out because for me, it was a pay increase from community pharmacy. But if you're a qualified community pharmacist who perhaps wants to change career and do the graduate scheme, you would be looking at a pay cut. And so, you need to pick your trade-offs and what you want to do in that sense.
But the skills and the opportunities and the people that you come across and the network that you build and the experience that you gain just working in all those different sectors is a game changer. When it comes to then applying for a job once the graduate scheme is done, you would become a leader potentially in an organisation, which you might not have had that opportunity if you had just started out as a community pharmacist and continued down that road.
So I completely agree with you on that. In the sense, the network you get from the graduate scheme is huge. It's amazing. I was at an event on Monday, and the chief executive of the chief executive of a hospital with a former graduate scheme, a schemer. You got many other people who were there who were ex-graduate scheme and doing really interesting things, like a former partner at KPMG. Was a graduate scheme. So was a graduate scheme. 4 of the last 5 chief execs in the NHS were graduate scheme or came through the graduate scheme. So in that way, it does give you that massive network that you can say, by the way, I know you're on the graduate scheme. Would it possibly borrow you 30 minutes of your time to have a conversation about X, Y, and Z? So yes, definitely. But I would say that, but also there's pharmacists who are also doing interesting things more generally as well. So there are pharmacists who are consultants. There are pharmacists in health technology. As you said, LinkedIn and social media is probably the best way to find them and to set up conversations with people to say, I'm a pharmacist, you're a pharmacist. It'd be great to understand more about what it is you do, because some of them are working as pharmacists within health technology companies. So there are definitely opportunities out there. I think it's just about how one might pitch themselves for that.
We're so lucky that everything's online now. Imagine 10 years earlier, you wouldn't have had all of this information. It would have been so much harder to find opportunities. Now, your world is your oyster. Literally everything and anything can be found online, and LinkedIn is my favorite place to be. So I find a lot on LinkedIn, which I love. Let's dive into the fact that you wanted to kind of upgrade your diploma to the MSc. And I mean, this is where your kind of maybe the start of artificial intelligence came into your life. So tell me a little bit about your thesis.
Sure, thank you. So I was looking at a topic to do for my master's, but I've always been the person, I choose the person over the topic usually, or anything. So I knew I wanted to do my thesis with a particular individual at Imperial, and we were talking about topics, and I was like, well, what do I like? I liked emerging technology, I liked pharmacy, and so what better way than to put the two together? And so when I did my undergraduates, I did my pharmacy degree, I did a very basic bit on quantum mechanics because I did computational models of drug discovery. And so I was like, okay, quantum computing still quite a while away, so why don't I look at something a bit more current, say artificial intelligence? And that led me down a whole path of understanding what is artificial intelligence and what are the policy barriers to that, and understanding that and relating that back to my favorite space, community pharmacy. And if anyone gets an opportunity to do a project like that, I would take it. It was genuinely fascinating. I worked with 2 awesome supervisors. I worked with Anne Jacqueline and Professor Houtan Ashrafian, who is now the lead for AI within the Institute of Global Health and Innovation at Imperial. And it was just really interesting bouncing ideas off them and doing the research that comes with it. But it was also really interesting because AI and community pharmacy, when I did my literature review as part of the thesis, there was nothing in there. Literally, my literature review was 5 lines saying, I used these 2 search terms, put it together, and there was no papers that came out. So it shows that people talk about it, but there's no actual literature about this space. And so it was really interesting almost going in with no research and trying to create a field in a way of AI within community pharmacy, and to understand what the UK can do in order to make that space happen in the right way.
And what did you discover?
So there were a number of things. I think, and these are things I've been working on behind the scenes, is trying to work with our professional society, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society, and various powers to say, do we have a stance on AI and within pharmacy? Because medicine have one. If you go on the Royal Society of Medicine, it was produced many years ago, but the Royal Pharmaceutical Society don't yet have one. And so I thought, but that's one definite space. Second thing is there's a lot of people are very unsure, what does AI even mean? So I think there's a whole piece about building that education up from a pharmacist perspective of what is AI and, all the different kinds of AI, because we're all hearing about ChatGPT as the current AI right now, but that's only one model. There's lots of different models of AI. And so understanding teaching people the different models and understanding their strengths and weaknesses, because as clinicians, that's what we need to know about any medicine. What's the, how can it be used? What's the limitation? What problems can it cause? And then what do we tell the patient? Those are that. And so I think the same sort of approach needs to be taken with learning about AI and developing that education. The third thing I would say is responsibility and ethics. So everyone is concerned about AI and how it should be applied. No, and that also applies to the world of community pharmacy and also pharmacists more generally. And so I think there does need to be a look into that space, say, how would we like AI to work within our space? Because at the end of the day, the technology will only work in the community pharmacy space as far as the community pharmacists or the pharmacists are willing to accept it. And so it needs to be done in a way that brings them on that journey and also helps them and takes their views into account of how it should work and then supports them in that. Because at the end of the day, you need it to work in a way that's safe for patients. And the pharmacist, as a clinician, is instrumental in that.
So for those that don't know much about kind of, I guess, AI within community pharmacy, what examples of things are there out there that a community pharmacist could implement?
So right now, I know of one tool currently being used in the UK, and by Invatec, called Titan. It's a PMR system, and they use some level of machine learning in their tool, in their PMR to help support the pharmacist's work. Other than that, I've not really seen much else in the UK. Although I'm having conversations at the moment with people from Canada and US, and there's definitely AI being looked into supporting the operational work of a pharmacy from their perspective. And I think it won't be long before that sort of technology, once it's proven and all that, trickles across to the UK, if not, and globally.
Interesting. So when you finished your MSc, where did you go next?
Sure. So I was doing my MSc alongside my work. So I had to pick up. So I completed my graduate scheme, and then I was like, okay, I've done a pre-reg and I've done a graduate scheme, almost like 2 graduate schemes. So I need to go and get a real job. And so I worked in NHS England for about 4 months on a short-term contract, then went to work again at NHS England. But this is in a space I really wanted to go into, in the innovation space. But also in March 2020, COVID happened. And so I quickly got redeployed into the Department of Health, and then started at NHS England, where we were trying to improve the adoption and scale of a cardiovascular disease pathway in the NHS. And it's interesting because I was doing my MSc alongside that and learning about the levers needed to make changes, whether that be from a policy, education, financial. And so it helped me in my day-to-day job in order to try and improve the scale and adoption of this pathway. And this pathway isn't anything like spectacular. It's like, you've got simvastatin as your first line. At the time, it was simvastatin as your first line, or atorvastatin, then ezetimibe, and then it became PCSK9 inhibitors. And that was the cardiovascular disease pathway at that time. And then it changed with the new medicine called inclisiran, which was coming in. And, my part of my role of managing that system transformation, national transformation, was to negotiate the inclusion of inclisiran within that pathway. And that was a really interesting period because, there was a lot of questions about how NICE accepted it, and there were questions from clinicians, and you get to, I'd seen something of that sort before when DOACs came out into the country, now DOACs are widely accepted as the gold standard for antiplatelet therapy. But back then, when it first came out, people were very, they said, well, why are we going to accept this when warfarin works fine? And it's taken a while for that to transition across into become the gold standard. And so imagine that anger from when, say, DOACs first came out, everyone, and general practice was very much like, we're not doing this, but imagine putting all those same clinicians into a room with myself as a representative from NHS England trying to make that change. And it was really, and I learned, and sitting in that interface as both, I'm a manager, I'm employed as a manager, but I'm still a clinician. So, and that interface as a clinician manager, and trying to bring people around to the way of thinking that we needed them to achieve in a way that they accepted, and also that they were happy with what happened. And so that was a really interesting period. And I learned a lot about myself and learned a lot about, the system and where the system is at in terms of top-down innovation, which is kind of what happens in this country. Not something I fully agree with, because I think innovation has to come from the bottom up. It's the patients and the clinicians on the ground who really understand the problems and then say, we need to look at a better way of doing something. So trying to work for an organization that's doing top-down innovation and the challenges that brings with it. And that was really interesting. I then felt I wanted to go in. I'd done that, and I wanted to understand more about the local level operational. How does a hospital work? At this point, I'd done community pharmacy, I'd done national picture, I'd really understood how a hospital worked. And so I looked for a role and secured a role at Hillingdon as a senior service manager. So what that means is I manage a number of services, specialties. So right now I manage hematology, palliative care, renal, oncology. But by the end of this month, I will also be picking up 2 other services within medicine. And I'm basically in charge of their financials, their performance, the P&L, and the line management of the staff as well. And so it was a really interesting transition. Very different because you come from community pharmacy, where pharmacy essentially from day one you're expected to be the manager in a community pharmacy, generally speaking. And I felt like that all over again, where I'm being put in charge of services and I'm the manager. So, okay, I need to really get up to speed very quickly on these areas. But what I realized actually was, whilst learning about operational management, is how disconnected it is from my health policy masters, because policy is one of those things that everyone has to follow and do, but that may not always translate to what happens on the ground. And so what I've been able to try to do is bridge that understanding, that what is called an implementation gap, understanding when you're implementing on the ground, and understanding what does that mean from a policy perspective. So, in the future, should I go down the route of becoming a healthcare advisor in a space that does policy work, understand what it means to build real implementable policies that work for everyone, not just the people at the top to just say tick box.
Okay. Oh, I have a few questions. I'm always like this. My brain ends up ticking in so many different ways, and then so many different questions come up. But a senior service manager role is quite a lot of responsibility when it comes to staff, as well as the money and the budget, which is quite overwhelming. Is it actually within pharmacy's budget, or it's completely outside of pharmacy, this role?
So this role is completely outside of pharmacy.
Yeah, I thought so. I just wanted to confirm, and that's really interesting. And when it came to working on the cardiovascular side and all that kind of policy development, I assume that a lot of your skills from the graduate scheme tied in really, really nicely with that role. And there was a lot of leadership. Obviously, you were mostly like desk-based or like...
Generally speaking, yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel in terms of your career progression that you had completely stepped away from a patient-facing role? It's a question that I ask myself now, because I'm still patient-facing, but I feel an urge to step away from it, because it's hard to be really, really good at both. And it's hard to split yourself in 2 ways. I'm splitting myself in way too many ways. People who watch this podcast know that I'm working in pediatrics, but obviously the podcast is not patient facing and then education and training. So a lot of my time is now away from patients, but I have a lot of guilt and a lot of fear of leaving that side of pharmacy. So how did you feel about that?
So that's something I genuinely had. There was coming to the end of the graduate scheme, I had what's called like a bit of a identity crisis. I had to answer the question for myself: is what does a pharmacist mean to me? Because am I, as some people might say at the time, which I did get the odd message about, was, am I a traitor to my profession? If I leave the profession in that way. But then, so I had to really answer to myself, what does a pharmacist mean to me? And it was really interesting because I met with a lot of people, and to understand, what does pharmacy mean what does pharmacy mean to them? To understand, their take, and understand, and just to get their view on things. And I realized for me because people were saying to me, and some advice I received was, well, you are only a pharmacist once you've done your diploma, you've got your prescribing, done your band 6, then you're a pharmacist. And I thought, okay, but if I don't have that, the GPHC still registers me as a pharmacist. So that's still, I see what they're saying to an extent, but when you speak to people who have done the diploma, many of them feel it's helpful, but a lot of them feel also it's not helpful because it's not the career that they want to go down. And I realized, well, what does my career? Where do I want to go? And I realized I enjoy leadership. I enjoy managing healthcare. I enjoy creating things. And so that doesn't need me to go down and do the clinical diploma and to understand what does being a pharmacist mean to me. So for me, it was two things. Well, so what is a pharmacist? A pharmacist is anyone who's involved in the pathway of a medicine. Anything that was a medicine, there's a pharm. That's pharmacy. And a pharmacist is a specialist, not who understands that. And so once I'd understood those 2 points to myself, I realized, well, I'm always going to be a pharmacist because I'm never going to lose my GPHC registration, even though it's due at the end of this month. I need to get that. But I'm always going to be a pharmacist because that's my identity. I just might not be what some may call a clinically practicing pharmacist. But that, for me, that's okay because I still understand the challenges and the problems that we face from a community pharmacy side. I suppose I can say that because I've seen my dad as a community pharmacist. I've worked with my dad from a very early age. I think there's a picture of me perhaps sweeping the pharmacy floor at the age of 7. So I'd seen the change in community pharmacy from a very early age right through to now, and so from that perspective, I understand the challenges, and that's what's really needed if you want to make a change in the profession and the career direction I want to go down in terms of entrepreneurship, leadership. And so I think from that perspective, that's what pharmacy kind of means to me in a way.
No, I love that answer, and it makes a lot of sense actually when you think about it. And once your mindset shifts, it's easy to then accept that. I mean, I've always imagined myself in the hospital setting because when I did my residency and I did my diploma, I loved the environment and I always considered staying in hospital forever. And I love being with patients. I love the kind of educational side of managing patients. And now I'm with, the younger generation as well as parents. And I love being able to support their journey when it comes to utilizing medicines. And it's the connection piece. For me, it's the connection piece that's so valuable, as well as being helpful. And when I stepped away from it, when I was living in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, I was really missing that interaction. And coming back to the UK, I stepped straight back into hospital thinking that, I'll go back to where my roots are and kind of what I know that I love and what I know I can do as an NHS employee. But it's been 6 years since I've been back, and there's been so many other opportunities that have come my way. And when you think about passion and love and your drive and the amount of hours that you spend doing something without realizing or making it feel like work, I'm now understanding that there is a different side of pharmacy, which allows me to still enjoy what I do and make an impact. And so I'm in that shift. And being in retail at the moment, in community pharmacy, just doing a few shifts here and there has been really enjoyable. I'm actually loving the journey. It's temporary for me. It's currently paying the bills. But I can see a shift in where I'm going to go, and I'm kind of looking forward to what that's going to be looking like. And obviously the podcast will tell everyone as the transition happens what it's going to kind of feel like. But you've been qualified for less than a decade, am I right?
Correct, yes.
So within less than 10 years, you have achieved a lot of things and you've done a lot with your career journey. And it's quite exciting to see a pharmacist with quite a short career journey, but having done so much from a leadership, innovation, government level that you don't traditionally see pharmacists doing. So from my point of view, this episode is really inspiring for people out there who think there is life away from patients and there is a life outside of the traditional role where you can thrive as a pharmacist, enjoy what you do and be the best version of yourself. And again, explore opportunities that aren't necessarily advertised, on the market. But again, I think I'm really excited to see kind of where your career pathway is going to go, because you could do anything now. Like you could literally do so many different things because you've gained so much skill set from the variety of jobs that you've had. We haven't even talked about the fact that you applied for the NHS England Clinical Entrepreneur Programme. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So I was at a point where I wanted to understand more about, by the way, thank you so much. I was at a point where I wanted to understand more about entrepreneurship. And, there's some that pharmacist entrepreneurs who I speak to on a reasonably every other day basis. But I wanted to understand what that meant for me. And so I applied to the program and I thought, let me give it my best shot. And went through the application process. I try to remember what it was. I think a load of questions. And I remember I was really stressing over it and just wrote and did the best I could and just wrote it out. And I realized, and I read my application and I reread it and I realized, one second, I've written it in such a way that may not flesh out the fact that I'm interested in patients. It's more written as myself. And I was like, I need to, at the end of the day, we're clinicians. So we got to make patients, it has to be the focus of what it is. I'm not a manager. I'm a pharmacist. So when I went through that, I made sure I really fleshed that out and lo and behold, got in the place. And that was awesome. One of the challenges I've had, however, is since securing a place is, when you work operationally, you don't get as much time in order to take off for study and education as, say, doctors do. This is just the way this things are structured. And so for me to try and attend the event actually became quite tricky. So I tried to catch up when I could on more attending webinars and attending the face-to-face events. But, I think I learned a lot. I learned about, IP, so intellectual property. That's a really important part of building anything as an entrepreneur. Also learned about leadership in a way, understanding what is my leadership style and understanding, how to flex that leadership style is incredibly important. And, this is theory at this point. So I'm now exercising some of that theory into my day to day because I work in such a broad environment. So in a way, it gave me the space and a network of people to interact with and to meet with, to try and understand more about myself, but also more about the startup space, which is where I feel I want to take my career at some points too.
Well, I look forward to hearing more about that element of your journey. I guess we have kind of talked about your entire career journey to date. Have you got anything else that you kind of wanted to add?
If there are pharmacy students who are listening, I'll definitely say there are two ways of you can see your degree, which is why people perhaps feel that which takes one to their career path. One is you see it as a pharmacy degree, therefore I'm going to be a pharmacist only. But if you take a step back and think that, there are chemistry students working at Goldman Sachs. So if I see my degree as a scientific degree, suddenly the opportunities open up might think in a slightly different way and what your opportunities open up. So think outside the box when it comes to that, and let the world be your oyster, and network. That is genuinely, that is how a lot of opportunities come by, and you get to understand more about the world. And so I would definitely network from an early age.
And where can people find you to network with you?
So you can reach me on Instagram or at Chai with Aditya, or you can reach me on LinkedIn at Aditya Aggarwal.
And I'll make sure to put all of that into the show notes. And I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode, and we will catch you next Monday.